burglar broke into a bakery in southern Ohio, ate the pastries, and then fell completely asleep behind the counter. He wasn't caught by a detective or a tip or a surveillance alert. He was caught because he couldn't stay awake long enough to leave the building. These 10 southern Ohio criminals didn't just make mistakes, they made every possible mistake in sequence, handing themselves over without a single chase. By the end of this video, you'll wonder how any of them thought any part of this would actually work. The bakery owner arrived at opening time and found the door pried open, the display case half emptied, and a grown man snoring on the floor behind the register. Officers didn't need to pursue him, corner him, or even raise their voices. They just woke him up. Think about that for a second. He planned a burglary, executed the break-in, and then let a sugar crash finish him before he ever reached the exit. Southern Ohio's backroads have produced a remarkable streak of criminals who defeated themselves so completely that the police were almost beside the point. And this man, dusted with powdered sugar and blinking under fluorescent lights, is just the beginning of that streak. Falling asleep mid-crime is one kind of failure, but at least that man stayed quiet about it. The fugitive from Scioto County took a completely different approach to being wanted by police. While officers were actively searching for him, he logged onto Facebook and started taunting the department directly, posting that they'd never find him. He didn't stop there. He kept updating, commenting back on replies, and practically narrating his own manhunt in real time. Have you ever watched someone confidently dig a hole they don't realize they're standing in? Deputies used the location data embedded in his posts to narrow down exactly where he was hiding. Every update he fired off was another breadcrumb leading straight to his door. They found him without breaking a sweat because he'd done most of the investigative work himself. Southern Ohio had just witnessed a man so eager to prove he was uncatchable that he personally handed over the catch. The only question left is whether someone could do even less to avoid getting caught. At least the Facebook fugitive made a conscious choice to embarrass himself. This next guy didn't even get that dignity. Somewhere in southern Ohio, a man decided to rob someone, tucked his phone into his pocket, and accidentally dialed 911 before he said a single word. The dispatcher picked up and heard exactly what you'd expect: shuffling, muffled voices, and then the unmistakable sound of a crime in progress. No tip from a neighbor, no surveillance camera, no detective work, just a robber who narrated his own felony to the one person legally required to send police. The dispatcher stayed on the line, piecing together the location from background noise and stray details, and officers were already moving before the guy had finished what he came to do. He had no idea the call was live, no idea help was already on the way, and absolutely no idea his own pocket had betrayed him. You have to wonder, was there even one moment where this plan felt airtight? Because from the outside, it looks like southern Ohio's criminals arrive pre-defeated, and the drunk driver who called 911 for directions is about to prove that point all over again. Somewhere on the backroads outside Chillicothe, a man decided he was too lost to keep driving and too drunk to figure out why. So he did what any reasonable person might do. He called 911 and asked the dispatcher for directions. The dispatcher, trained to keep callers talking, asked where he was coming from and how he was doing behind the wheel. He answered both questions honestly, which is where the evening took a turn he didn't see coming. Within minutes, officers had his location, his condition, and a recorded confession that no defense attorney could untangle. There's something almost sad about it, not the arrest, but the gap between what he thought he was doing and what he was actually doing. He wasn't trying to get caught, he genuinely just needed help getting home. The road that felt like a solution led him straight into the problem. And if a drunk man's instinct is to call 911 for a lifeline, imagine what happens when someone plans their getaway and still can't outrun their own decisions. Some criminals fail because they panic, and some fail because they're reckless, but this one failed because he genuinely thought a taxi was a solid getaway plan. After committing a theft in southern Ohio, the man didn't run, didn't hide, and didn't even try to blend into the scenery. He walked outside, hailed a cab, and climbed in like he was heading to the airport after a long week. The problem with a taxi isn't just that the driver remembers your face. It's that the company has your pickup location, your drop-off address, and a time-stamped digital record of every mile you traveled. Investigators didn't need a witness or a tip or a lucky break to find this guy. They needed about 15 minutes and a phone call to the dispatch office. You can almost picture the detective's face when the lead came in. Not excitement, just a slow nod of recognition. At some point, you have to wonder whether any criminal on this list sat down beforehand and thought, even once, about what happens next. The ATV riders on Masterminds Road suggest the answer is a hard no. Solo stupidity is one thing, but what happens when an entire group decides to abandon common sense together? On Masterminds Road, a crew of ATV riders tore through private property in broad daylight, leaving ruts, broken fencing, and a trail of noise that carried for half a mile. They weren't sneaking through at midnight or cutting their engines near the road. They were loud, visible, and apparently convinced that witnesses don't count if you're moving fast enough. Neighbors didn't need to call it in from memory. They watched the whole thing unfold from their front porches. When deputies arrived, the tire tracks led almost directly back to the riders, who hadn't gone far and hadn't bothered to hide. More people in a group usually means more chances for one person to say, maybe we shouldn't do this. Not here. Southern Ohio's backroads have a way of turning even collective decision-making into a solo act of self-destruction, and some of the incidents out here barely qualify as crimes at all. Not every call that comes in from the backroads involves an actual crime, and that gap tells you something important. Someone on Rocky Road once called in a found juvenile, a child wandering unattended, which sounds alarming until you realize nobody followed up and the whole thing quietly dissolved. The deer versus car report is exactly what it sounds like. A deer hit a car or a car hit a deer, and someone felt that warranted a dispatcher's full attention. What you're really hearing in these calls is a community that treats the police line as a general-purpose hotline for life's inconveniences. The online harassment case is the crown jewel. Someone reported being harassed online. Investigators looked into it, and the harassment turned out to be essentially nothing at all. Every single entry on this list, from the butt dial to the bakery nap to the deer, ends the same way. The situation collapsed under its own weight before anyone in a uniform had to do much. Southern Ohio's backroads don't just produce dumb criminals. They produce an entire ecosystem where confusion, bad judgment, and sheer boredom do the law's job for it. Which makes what happened next almost refreshing, because at least one thief had the audacity to show up twice. Most criminals at least have the sense to leave and stay gone, but this guy couldn't manage even that. He broke into a home in southern Ohio, grabbed what he could carry, and walked out the door into the night. Then he realized he'd left something behind, something he wanted badly enough to go back for. So he returned to the same house, knocked on the door, and asked the homeowner if he could collect the rest of his stolen goods. The homeowner called the police, and the thief waited patiently for them to arrive, apparently unaware that patience was the one thing working against him. That is the purest version of every story in this video. A fugitive taunting cops on Facebook, a robber butt-dialing 911, a burglar falling asleep in a bakery, a drunk driver calling for directions, a getaway taxi, ATV vandals leaving tire tracks home. Southern Ohio's backroads didn't produce master criminals. They produced men who defeated themselves every single time without any help at all.